jumps over Muck and Singh. Here comes Gama. A low blow by Muck and Singh. He's holding Hart.
Oh no, again.
Can you believe that?
For the fire.
Oh, and Hart in all kinds of pain. Here comes Bruce Hart and Bill Kazmaier to his rescue. Muck and Singh has been disqualified, but Owen Hart in pain. He's in trouble. He got fire in the face. He's clutching his eyes. I cannot believe this.
I'm speechless. I am speechless.
Evil, despicable, fearsome, and polarizing. Join us this month on Grappling with Canada as we take a deep dive into the life and career of the Great Gama Singh and the rise of Karachi Vice. Hello everyone, and to another action-packed, yet very much still an under construction episode of Grappling with Canada. As usual, I'm your host, the Taxman, and I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on what part of the world, what time zone, what continent, anywhere in the world that you're listening to us. I want to thank you very much for checking out the program today. I'm very much looking forward to digging into this month's episode because of the topic. First off is somebody who I knew a little bit about from previous wrestling knowledge, if you will, but learned a great deal throughout the years and was reintroduced to him in the later couple of years, and that's something that we are going to discuss a little bit further in this month's episode. So I'm very much looking forward to our subject matter today. But before we get into all that, first off, I want to thank everybody who checked out the Abdullah the Butcher episode from last month. I understand that it was a little bit hard to hear for some people. I mean, realistically, not every podcast is going to start off with essentially an attempted murder, but I do appreciate everybody having an open mind and checking out that program. I realize that, and like I had said in that program, Abdul the Butcher is not everybody's cup of tea, and certainly not mine in terms of, the blood, guts, gore, death match, barbed wire, forks, knives, blades, bottles of OE getting smashed over guys' heads and them getting cut up with the shards. It's not everybody's thing, but I thought that we did a very good job, and a lot of the credit goes to that, to the guests that I had in the program. But I thought that we did a really good job of highlighting just how important Abdul the Butcher was, not just to professional wrestling, because as listeners of this show know, we have a very large audience who really doesn't care about professional wrestling at all, but they're here because they want to hear the interesting stories. And I thought that the story of Abdul the Butcher and what he meant, not only here in Canada and specifically in Montreal, Pat LaPrade did a fantastic job of illustrating that, but also, the significance that he had down south, and especially overseas in Japan with Iad joining the program to discuss that. So once again, I want to thank everybody for having an open mind and checking out the Abdullah the Butcher episode from last month. Speaking of which, if this is your first time to the program, welcome. I highly suggest that you go in the archives of this program, wherever you buy, sell, trade, barter, or find your favorite podcasts, whether that be on Good Pods, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify. If you use that wonderful search bar on whatever your podcast platform of choice, you will find our back catalog. So you'll find the aforementioned Abdullah the Butcher episode. You'll also find episodes on Jack Taylor, Dino Bravo, and Stu Hart, to name a few. But some tremendous stuff in the back catalog. We're only on episode 9, so it's not like you got to go way in the weeds to find them. Although, as this one will be, they are deep dive episodes, which is why the good Lord invented the pause button. So if you guys ever are listening to an episode and you're at the 2-hour mark or wherever you are in the program and you need to take a little breather, that's what that wonderful pause button is for, which is something that I wanted to bring up real quick because a couple people were asking if I was going to, instead of do this show monthly, and this is something that we're going to talk about later on in the program as well, but I had a few people asking if I was going to continue to broadcast this show monthly in one long form program or if I would break it up into 4 parts throughout the month. And I'm going to keep it as the long form program for a couple of reasons. One is this show takes an inordinate amount of time to research, produce, get guests and all that kind of stuff. So it would be adding a lot more onto my plate personally to try and break it up like that. But more importantly, I feel like the program would lose quite a bit of the integrity that it holds if I were to break it up into sections. Because then it's like, okay, how do you break it up properly? And then, obviously some guests run longer than others, and there's more information in some portions of the program than others. So that's not something I'm interested in doing. This program will continue to run as it is. Once a month at the first of the month. It's easy to find, and that's the way we're going to continue running the program into the future. There are a few notes and information about the future of the program that I want to get to way later on in the program, but I don't want to bog the entire front end of this program down with all that little bit of minutia. I do want to start by saying that if this is your first time listening to us, or if it's your 9th time listening to us, you can find us on many different social media platforms. On Facebook, we have a Facebook group and a Facebook page, both titled Grappling with Canada. So use that wonderful Facebook groups search bar or Facebook pages search bar, search Grappling with Canada. Make sure you like the page and come on in and join the group. The benefit to joining the group is always a week before the next month's episode drops, as the kids say. I always put a teaser of what the upcoming episode is going to be about. So if you have any questions that you would like brought up on that month's episode, or if there's any specific information that you want researched and included on that episode, once again, usually a week before that episode is set to release, I put the teaser up on the Facebook group. So once again, use that wonderful Facebook group search bar, find us Grappling with Canada, and come join the program. You can also find us on Instagram. Once again, Grappling with Canada, use that Instagram search bar. You can find me on Twitter at 6_podcast. And for anybody who is curious why that is in relation to the previous podcast that I used to run, which you're going to hear a little bit later about with my tremendous guests that I have on the show tonight. But anyways, on Twitter at 6_podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, youtube.com/c/6sided podcast. Of note on the YouTube page, and I just want to make mention of this as well, that program, it's very hard for me to release on the first consistently. I'm trying hard to get back on a schedule where it's the week of that it'll get released on the YouTube page. But for the full unadulterated, listen to me talk version of the program, the best way to find it is on the various podcast platforms. But feel free as well, throw a subscribe on that YouTube page. Once again, youtube.com/c/6sided podcast. We're marching our way to 1,000. I think we're almost at the 500 mark, so every little bit helps. You can also, like I said, find us on Good Pods. That's a wonderful new podcasting platform. And speaking of which, while you're on Good Pods, if you are so inclined, you can also donate to the podcast via the tip jar function. You can also, if you want to donate to the podcast, you can buy me a beer. Buymeacoffee.com/grappling is where you'll find that option. go ahead and buy the Taxman a beer. It is thirsty work putting together this podcast, and there is no producer, there's no writer, there's no team behind me, there's no research assistants, interns, nothing. We don't all have a Hotchkiss feather bottom, if you will, but it's just me and my wonderful guests that I'm so gracious in having on the program. So if you want to support the program, two wonderful ways to do it is buymeacoffee.com/grappling, or on the Good Pods app, you can hit that tip jar function. T-shirts, yes, I've mentioned it a few times. I'm going to mention it again, but we're going to save that for the end of the program as well. Like I said, I don't want to inundate you guys with 1,000 things and bog the entire program down right at the start of it. So, with all that being said, I'm really, really, really excited for this month's episode. I have a tremendous guest that I know that you guys are going to enjoy. Of note, just please keep in mind, everybody, that because I am in the construction portion still at my house, I am having to move from various locations for the recording process of the podcast. So, that being said, if the audio quality is not what it normally is on previous episodes, I apologize. I'm trying to do the best that I can with my surroundings, if you will. So this should hopefully be cleared up for our October release. I would hope so at the very least. So once again, if the audio is a little bit off, or if the audio is louder in some parts, quieter in some parts, or vice versa, whatever you may have, it's just that's the hand I'm dealt right now, and I'm trying to work with it. So I do appreciate you guys though sticking with me, and for all the kind words that I've been receiving regarding the program lately. And that is also something I'm going to be talking about later on in the program as well, because I've got a ton of really nice comments and a ton of positive feedback lately that has really made all this worthwhile. So I want to thank everybody for that. So before we get into tonight's program, you had a little bit of a teaser clip at the start of the show in regards to a little bit of treachery of Great Gama Singh throwing a fireball in Owen Hart's face. We are going to hear the flip side of that issue, and on the other side, we're going to get right into this program. So please enjoy this classic Stampede Wrestling audio, and on the other side, we are going to jump right into the program today.
I can think of better things to do than this.
Waylon,
Talking to you.
be a man now, Waylon. You heard me pleading with him.
What
Don't
is
wrestle. You heard me
What is it
pleading.
with this fire?
If
What
he
is
wants
that?
to be that stupid, I pleaded with him. Don't wrestle me. You can't wrestle a man. You're a
The
punk.
key word is wrestle.
Hey,
It's
I'll
not
tell you.
wrestling.
No, Waylon. You come in the ring. It's war. How stupid can he be? Now, why don't he have all Stu Hart just bring me the belt and say you're the greatest champion that ever lived, and keep the punk kid home doing dishes or something?
Forget it.
If they want to serve it to me, here it is. I'll take it. I'll tell you what, Waylon. Maybe some burnt face could be a delicacy
I
here.
know. I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
Waylon.
What are you doing in there with that fire?
I'm in a fire routine.
Very well.
Talking about that, Waylon. I have no idea what
I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to give you any more time. Forget it.
Now, as we discuss the career of Great Gama Singh, and obviously our other main event this evening, the Karachi Vice, there is something important that I just want to discuss. We are going to move a little bit throughout the timelines here. So what I'm going to do is give you a brief rundown of his career. I don't want to get too far in the weeds because that's really not what we do in this program. But after I'm done that, I want to expand on a few very interesting topics of conversation that are very pertinent to his singles career and as well with his career with the Karachi Vice. But we can't talk about any of that unless we start at the very beginning. So born December 8th, 1954 in Punjabi, Indian, Gadwar Singh Sahota would end up coming to Canada in roughly 1963. So this all started with his father immigrating to Canada from India, and then, like I said, in around 1963 he ended up sending for his family, and that's how Gama Singh ended up coming to Canada. He went to school in Merritt, British Columbia, and excelled in amateur wrestling. During his youth, he was in Vancouver working out at the YMCA, where he met Bill Parsak. He was an old-time wrestler who had seen him in action in the amateur ranks. He trained Singh for 6 months and suggested that it was time to go to Calgary and Stampede Wrestling. Naturally, we know who he would run into there. Singh went to Calgary, he met Stu Hart, and then started working out with Carlos Belafonte, who, as wrestling fans would know, ended up being Carlos Colon, who was the biggest name in Puerto Rican wrestling history. Although there is a lot of baggage associated with his name, mostly with the murder of Bruiser Brody. Not something I'm going to get into terribly tonight, because that would be a whole other topic for a whole other podcast, which is really not related to Grappling with Canada or what we're focusing on tonight. But it is interesting of how all of these international tendrils seemingly keep running through Canada. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Calgary, if we're talking about BC, if we're talking about here in Winnipeg, or in Montreal, or in the Maritimes, which we're going to discuss in a later episode. All of this international talent just seems to intersect and find its way through Canada, into Canada, and exported from Canada. It's just, the more I read into all this, the more it's just absolutely amazing to me. So after he got his training from Stu Hart, and obviously with Carlos Colon as well, he ended up hitting the road. He spent some time in Georgia. He spent some time in All-Star Wrestling in Vancouver. This is something we would have covered, or that promotion we would have covered in the Gene Kiniski episode, as well as he spent time in California, where there's no video evidence of it that I could find, but apparently he had some outstanding matches with Rowdy Roddy Piper. So if anybody is listening to this program and you have some video footage of Great Gama Singh versus Rowdy Roddy Piper, I would personally love to see it. But I know for a fact that there's a ton of wrestling fans who would love to see those type of matches. Now, of note as well, when he first started his career, he was actually wrestling under his assumed or legal name, if you will. He didn't end up actually going for wrestling, I should say, under the Great Gama gimmick until about 1974. This is in reference to arguably the greatest Indian wrestler of all time, Great Gama, who, from what I can read, and I understand that there's quite a bit of kayfabe in wrestling, for lack of a better term. I don't like to use wrestling terms, but there's a lot of misdirection and stories in professional wrestling, as we all know. But from all records that I can gather, Great Gama, the original, in the early 1900s, went undefeated in 5,000 wrestling matches. You heard that right. He went undefeated in 5,000 consecutive wrestling matches. And actually, from everything that I've been able to read, he went undefeated and retired. So he would have went 5,000-0, which is absolutely incredible. But he was a big deal in India in the early stages of the wrestling scene. Now, a lot of people will understand that, professional wrestling in North America really got its kickstart in the late 1800s, kind of died off a little bit, then roared back in the early 1900s. This is evidenced by our couple of months ago, our episode on wrestling pioneer Jack Taylor. It is interesting, though, that professional wrestling was also huge in other markets, and you wouldn't think India would be one, but proof is in the pudding. Therefore, that's where he got his name from. Now, through the 70s and the 80s, Gama spent most of his time in Stampede Wrestling, did a lot in Vancouver for All-Star Wrestling, did many spots internationally. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but he went essentially all over the world. He went to, obviously, the United States, spent time in Puerto Rico, spent time in Japan, in Trinidad and Tobago, in South Africa. He was basically globetrotting, hot-shotting all around the world. And a lot of this was due to talent exchanges with Stampede Wrestling, but a lot of it was because of the name that he was starting to get for himself. A very important part of this is something that we're going to describe a little bit later. But North American wrestling fans would naturally most know him for his run in Stampede Wrestling, which we're going to be focusing on quite a bit today as well. Of note as well, and this is something that's often overlooked in the career of Great Gama Singh, is that he did spend some time in the mid to late 80s, the early to mid 80s with the WWF. So how that came about is Vince McMahon was expanding the WWF, and he was looking for an Indian wrestler to start working on tours in the Middle East. This is at a time where he was heavily recruiting from Stampede. We discussed that in our Stu Hart episode. That's episode 1 of Grappling with Canada. Myself and Heath McCoy go deep into the weeds into that situation, if you will. So definitely want to check that out if you haven't listened to that one yet. But also they were moving into markets that they normally hadn't been moving into, such as places like Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Australia, Hawaii, places that were very foreign at the time to WWF, but places that they were looking to expand. And when you're looking to expand into territories, you want to be taking established stars that have already made their names in said territories. Henceforth, getting a guy like Great Gama Singh on your roster leads that credibility because the fans know him, they're going to pay the money to see him, and it's that touchstone moment for them. Even if they don't know what the WWF is as a company, they know the name Great Gama Singh, so they're going to come out and check it out. Of note, though, interestingly enough, there is a couple of regrets that Great Gama would have, and he would be quoted in an article as saying, quote, "Their schedule was so hectic. I said, I'll do the overseas trips for you, but just to wrestle here. He had just gotten married at the time. His wife was not too happy with him being on the road, and he had a newborn baby and all that. The only regret he goes on to say in this article, the only regret that I have is that I didn't stay with the WWF, especially nowadays, financially speaking, with the money that they're making now and the exposure that they're getting. At the time when I was with them, they were just kind of starting out. I didn't have any idea how big they were going to be as they are now." Now, this period of time that Great Gama Singh was with the WWF was before the big wrestling boom of the late 80s, before Hulkamania, before the WrestleManias, before the Ultimate Warrior. Not that I have my own opinions about him, but what I'm saying is that he arrived there he was in the right place at the wrong time, if you will. We'll just kind of leave it at that. But he was there, and it is something that's kind of overlooked as time has went on, but something that I wanted to touch on as well in in terms of this program today. Now, clearly he had a blast wrestling in Calgary for Stampede Wrestling, but he was quoted in this same article as saying a couple of interesting places being his favorite places to wrestle, and not places that you would normally consider somebody having a fulfilling wrestling career, until you read a little bit more into it. So he said that his favorite location to wrestle was in the Caribbean. He would be quoted as saying, quote, "In Puerto Rico, I was a heel, and in Trinidad and Barbados, I was a babyface. So I got to do both things at the same time. The money was there, plus the climate was right." And he would go on to talk about his time in South Africa. He would say, quote, "South Africa has always been a big market for me. His first trip was there in 1983, and he's up until the time of this article, which was, I believe, 1998, he was still making yearly trips there." This goes back to our conversation about his time in the WWF. He would be quoted as saying as well, "They were looking for an Indian. There was a big market for Indian wrestlers there. My very first trip, we set attendance records in several different places. It just took off like crazy. I made an enormous amount of money. I did very, very well. And I'm still doing well over there, as a matter of fact." He would say that he had some fantastic matches with Abdul the Butcher. See last month's episode of Grappling with Canada for a deep dive discussion about him, as well as with the Funks. And this is the story that I read, and I reread it a couple of times because it was fascinating, and I had never heard it before, but I can definitely see it play out in my mind's eye. And probably the reason I didn't hear it before is because it didn't happen in Canada. And remember, we're talking about, late 70s, early 80s, into the mid 80s. There's no YouTube, there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's no anything like that. If you essentially weren't plugged into the wrestling newspapers, of which there were very few, and a lot of them still maybe would have missed a story like this. So unless you were essentially there, you wouldn't have heard this story. But the story that I'm alluding to, I read it and I read it again and I read it a third time before I actually allowed it to sink in and was like, oh my god, this is incredible. Why has this never come up before? So anyways, I know I'm preambling and I'm getting into it right now. So he would be quoted as saying, and this is in regards to him wrestling a series of matches against Frenchie Martin. Now, this is somebody who we've also talked about in the Abdul the Butcher episode, but also in our Dino Bravo episode with Pat LaPrade and Bertrand Hébert on that one. So you can, as I know that we're only in episode 9 of this podcast, but in every episode, essentially, it doesn't matter what era these wrestlers are from, there's still these tendrils and these touchstones from generation to generation to generation, from coast to coast in Canada. It's crazy, and this is a further example of that. So he was quoted as saying, "We did an angle in Trinidad where I was injured in the ring. I was leaving Trinidad at the time. They carried me out. The fans thought I was injured very seriously. Then, what happened was, at the same time, one wrestler's father had passed away. So the word got out from that. I'm going to try that again. So the word had got out from a wrestler's father to a wrestler had passed away to Gama Singh had passed away. So the timing was so perfect. Everyone thought that I had died from the pile driver that Frenchie Martin had given me. The radio stations and the newspapers were all going crazy in Trinidad. They wanted to know what was happening. About 2 months later, I got to the island for a return match against Frenchie Martin, and they sold the arena out and turned away 20,000 people. Think about that one for a second. They wrestled in a stadium. They turned away 20,000 people. 2 Canadians in Trinidad. It's incredible. Again, I was absolutely gobsmacked that this story is... I've never heard this, and I don't know any wrestling fan who may have known this before, who hasn't talked about this, but this is absolutely incredible. And this just further goes to the fact of, the whole purpose of doing this program is stories like this that nobody has been talking about, or it's been lost to the sands of time until you dig it up on an article from 20 whatever years ago. This is crazy. Am I surprised? Yes, to a point. I'm not, because of the name value of both of the individuals involved. Obviously, Great Gama Singh and Frenchie Martin is no slouch himself. But to me, this is just, it further cements the fact that Canada is just so involved and so influential across the decades, across the entire run of what we would call modern or even early professional wrestling. Just the more I read, the more I get into this program, the more I'm just astounded about how, although we are large in landmass, we are very small in population, how our wonderful country has kind of shaped the wrestling landscape and continues to today. Now, I also want to make mention that Gama Singh has made a return to professional wrestling. In the year 2018, he signed a contract with Impact Wrestling, where he was the on-screen manager of the Desi Hit Squad. Not Desi like they call it, and this is something that I get into the program with later with my wonderful guests that you're going to hear after this. But he was reintroduced to the wrestling world, some of which I'm sure hadn't seen him ever before, and he was managing the Desi Hit Squad, or pronounced properly, the Desi Hit Squad. Now, of note in that stable specifically, obviously you had Great Gama Singh as the leader, the voice of the Desi Hit Squad for those. You also had Raj Singh, who was, or is, I shouldn't say it in past tense, is Gama's son. Rohit Raju, who is a tremendous wrestler. If anybody hasn't seen anything from Rohit Raju, also known as Hakeem Zain for the Chicagoland AAW program, which again you're going to hear a little bit more about that with my guest Trent Zuberi later on in the program. Also as well, they had Mahabal Shira, and he was kind of the muscle of the group, if you will. And then they had some various other members. They had Bhupinder Singh was in it. Gursinder Singh was also in it for a little bit, and Vikas Kumar as well was a part of it as well. I have my own opinions about what that group actually could have been versus what they ended up being, and that's something that we're really going to expand upon later on in my interview with Trent Zuberi, like I just mentioned. So this is kind of like an overview of kind of Gama's in-ring movements, we'll say, throughout his early career in the early 70s. Obviously, his move to the WWF in the mid-80s, and then his international footprint. Clearly, he made a massive impact, like I said, in the Caribbeans. He made a big impact in Japan as well. He had some fantastic matches there, and his biggest impact, in my opinion, was at home in Calgary. And this is something that I'm going to expand on a little bit more in a second, as we also start moving into talking about the formation and domination of the Karachi Vice. But before that, I'm going to pause quick. We're going to play some more classic Stampede Wrestling audio. This is an in-ring interview with Gama Singh, and on the other side, we are going to start getting into the despicable Karachi Vice.
Thought maybe your personality would improve after these years.
Another one just bit the dust, Ed Woolen.
You had a tough time with him, didn't you notice?
I was just playing with him, man.
Oh, sure.
You know, you're not looking so bad after all this time for a guy who sits in the back with a microphone in his hand. That's a lot more than I can say.
Yeah,
a lot of
all
those
right,
people
go
out
on.
there, in TVs in the living rooms, who's sitting there with a can of beer, seeing with their wives or girlfriends because they're too chicken, too afraid to come out here and watch a real man in living color. If they know, Ed Woolen, as well as you do, as well as I do, if they were to come out here with their wives or their girlfriends, they see a real man out here, they probably end up driving home alone.
Right.
You know, I'm not done here. I'm not done.
Yeah,
Don't walk away.
you're not done. All right, hurry up. You've
What
got another 60
What I want to
seconds.
know is what I'm doing wrestling the first and the second match in the preliminaries with guys like Randy Weber. I have proven myself over and over again, not only here, but throughout the world, Ed Woolen. What am I doing wrestling Randy Weber, a piece of garbage, when Stu Hart promised me that I would be immediately getting a title shot, but Bruce Hart, which is a stepping stone for me, getting a title shot with Dynamite Kid, who is coming here in 2 to 3 weeks. Dynamite Kid, I am going to be ready for him because I know I'm going to look.
You got to qualify to meet him yet.
It doesn't take much qualifying for a man of my caliber.
All right, you had your time. You had your time. The Great Gama.
Now, as we move into this portion of the program, there is going to be something that we need to discuss, and that is racism in the territory. Now, through my research, not just specifically with Calgary, but because we're talking about Stampede Wrestling very much at the crux of this episode today, it is what I'm going to focus on as well. I've read many books, well-written books from many authors about professional wrestling, and it seems to me that the ones written in regards to Stampede Wrestling or the Calgary territory, or really even the Northwest, you'll always see a reviewer, I'll use the term loosely, on, whether it's Amazon or whatever. I don't really want to give these things a plug because I'm not entirely certain the reason for it, and I'll explain why I say that in a second. But you'll always see a reviewer who will criticize whatever book, publication, program, whatever, for downplaying racism in the territory. Now, I have a bit of a problem with that, and here's why. People, and I don't know why this is, but there are certain people who try to make it seem like the Calgary Stampede territory was an inherently racist territory. Or, by extension of that, the Stampede Wrestling office or the Hart family, because that's who was running the promotion, were, however you want to phrase it, inherently racist. And I don't believe that for a second, and I'm going to explain a few reasons why. If you look at the types of talent that they had in Stampede Wrestling throughout the years, there was always quite a bit of visible minority talent. Whether it is somebody like the Great Gama Singh, whether it was them bringing in somebody like Abdul the Butcher. Obviously, we just spoke a great deal about him last month in our episode. Whether it was someone like Bad News Allen, who was not at all presented like, the stereotypical black guy that a lot of other promotions, especially in the southern U.S., would present talent. You had all kinds of talent from Japan. Big names like Jushin Thunder Liger come to mind, like right off the top of the bat. You had Carlos Colon, who we just mentioned previously, big star from Puerto Rico. You had Latino talent from Mexico. You had talent from all over the world. And there was never really, in my opinion, and if somebody can quantify this differently, please, I'm open for debate, if you will. But from all the articles I've read, all the books that I've read, all the interviews I've heard, all of the behind-the-scenes information, if you will, that I've been privy to throughout the course of this program, all of this leads me to believe that this is kind of a false narrative and a very damaging perspective and point of view to have. When you label a company as racist, and then that gets perpetuated throughout the years to where that's, when you research Stampede Wrestling, for example, I'm not saying it's the first thing that pops up is Stampede Wrestling is racist, but if you further a story like that, if you further a narrative like that, eventually it's going to become more well-known, more fabled, if you will. And unfortunately, we see in the internet age, fable turns to fact very quickly. So the racism thing, while it does and did exist, not just in Stampede Wrestling, but it still exists all over the world. Unfortunately, we're not done with this ugly monster, and it's not just a Canadian thing, it's not just an American thing, although we admittedly do have a problem with it here in Canada, and that's something that we really as a nation need to strive to do a better job to kind of weed out. To say that, Stampede Wrestling itself was racist, and to say that the fans are racist, I think it's a pretty horrible thing to say to a group of people. Obviously, there's bad apples in every bunch. Everybody knows that. It's not a secret. I'm not denying that. And we are going to fully discuss that right now in the Karachi Vice segment of this episode. But I wanted to kind of dispel this notion that seems to be creeping up a little bit more often as I kind of research more into the back scene, back catalog, the back stories of professional wrestling. There's an undertone and an undercurrent that's there, but I think people spend a lot more time reading into that than they do reading into the actual happenings in the territories, which I think does a tremendous disservice to the men and women who worked in these territories. So I don't mean to get on a big political whatever about, what's racist and what's not. Believe me, I'm not. But I felt the need to quantify that out the gate, because we're going to get into some comments here that some people may agree with, they may not agree with. It doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what the person who said it thinks. And the person who said it is Gama Singh, and somebody else who we're going to be introduced to very quickly is Makan Singh. Now, before we really get into any of that, we'll just quickly discuss how the Karachi Vice stable came into existence. Again, I'm going to quote this article, and I should say that this article is from Slam Wrestling. It's from 1998, so it's not the easiest thing to find. It took me a while to find it myself, but in this article, Great Gama went on to say, quote, "Everybody still talks about the Karachi Vice. It was an accidental thing how it came about. There was myself and Mike Shaw, who I had changed his name to Makan Singh, and we had Steve DeSalvo and Kerry Brown. I think we were all doing an interview together. We did a few interviews for a few weeks in a row, and then it just kind of came out. This is the Karachi Vice. Because Miami Vice, the TV show, was quite hot at the time. And then the people just kind of picked up from that. Then the following week, we saw all kinds of signs coming out. Karachi Ice, Karachi Mice, and that sort of thing. We just kind of followed through and kept it going from there. It became quite a hot thing for a couple of years at least." He's being very modest in that description. The Karachi Vice was a lot more than just the hot thing for a couple of weeks. And that's a point that I discuss in depth later on with Trent Zuberi. So, the Karachi Vice was founded in the 1980s. It was Gama Singh, Makan Singh, more on him later, Steve DeSalvo, Makan Singh, Kerry Brown, Rhonda Singh, Ron Starr, and they had managers as well, J.R. Foley and Abu Wizal. Now, this was like the most hated group in professional wrestling. I would say conservatively, probably in history at that point. Now, this is before the NWO changed how factions, how groups would come into wrestling, and they just essentially changed the entire game. This predates that. This predates like D-Generation X or Nation of Domination, all these big bad guy groups, to quote, or to use a non-wrestling term for once in the program tonight. But essentially this was a group designed to battle all of the top baby faces, all of the top good guys in the territory, namely the Hart family, Dynamite Kid, Chris Benoit, and others. So what happened was, with this group, it was Gama Singh, who already had a reputation as a bad guy and was getting heat with the fans. Heat being, you know, the hatred, the vile, the boos, and whatever from the crowd. He was already getting that, so the idea came about. Okay, so he's got all this heat. Let's build up a stable of bad guys that can go against all the good guys and kind of kickstart this thing, because at this time Stampede Wrestling wasn't doing the numbers that they were in the 60s or definitely in the 70s. So this idea was kind of born out of that, and what you had was essentially people would come in, change their name, join the Hindu faith, however you want to say it, and join Great Gama Singh's Karachi Vice stable. Now, naturally, Great Gama Singh is the main character in the Karachi Vice stable. Everybody else, for the most part, was bit players, with the exception of Makan Singh. Now, non-wrestling fans will have no idea who that is. Most wrestling fans may not recognize who that is. But if you want to spend some of your time and get completely grossed out, throw in your Google machine Bastion Booger. And I can already hear wrestling fans cringing about that one. But essentially he was a fat, disgusting slob portrayed as such in the WWF. He was greasy and had food everywhere. He was a disgusting, amorphous blob, for a lack of a better way to phrase it. And I'm not knocking the man behind the character, but that's what the portrayal was in the WWF. They cut his hair off. He was not a looker, as the ladies might say, and that was kind of they just went full bore with this Bastion Booger gimmick. Ugh, I even hate saying it. It's such a disgusting. Ugh, I hate it so much. But anyways, so, but when he was in the Stampede Wrestling territories, we'll be completely honest about it, he was just another big fat guy. I'm not disparaging him. I'm just explaining what was actually going on at the time. So he was kind of in the background. He wasn't really doing a whole lot in the territory. He had some success, but not a whole lot. And then he being Mike Shaw, changes his name to Makan Singh, joins the Karachi Vice, and it's like gangbusters. Like, instantly he's got heat. Instantly the crowd hates him. And he knew exactly how to needle the crowd every single time to get exactly the response that he was looking for. To illustrate that, I'm going to play a quick audio clip, and then I'm really going to dive into the Karachi Vice. So like I said, I'm going to play this quick audio clip of the Karachi Vice. On the other side, we're really going to dig deep into the Karachi Vice.
Okay, here we are with the Great Gama, Champagne, Jerry Morrow, and Garfield Ports. And Great Gama, I want to start with you. I want to say it's good to see you back, but only because it means you can finally put that Commonwealth mid-heavyweight title up for grabs. People have been getting tired of waiting.
Quite obvious, Jim Davies. The pleasure is all yours. I know the people in Canada have been dying for my presence back in this country, but I hate to tell you people, I was on a very, very successful tour of the world. In South Africa, I took on two of the best South Africans and made mincemeat out of them. I went to India, I went to Pakistan, I went to England. I defeated the best that they had to put against me for this title. As you can see, I came out the winner one more time.
I've got to ask you.
Stop me. Okay. You don't have to ask
You're on a roll.
Let me talk. When I'm talking, don't you dare stop me. And another thing, when I went home to Karachi, Pakistan, they gave me the red carpet treatment. The red carpet was laid out in the street of Karachi, Pakistan. As I prayed through the main street, the people on their hands and knees, the treatment that only a champion deserves, something that you people should be doing the same thing for me here. You haven't done that. You met me in the dressing room. You just gave me a cold handshake, young Dave. You should have been on your hands and knees, and you should have kissed the palm of my hand.
Okay, I'll put you under a pedestal. Under a pedestal.
This belt's going to be resting on my waist a long time because I'm going to take a break because I had a very, very tough time out there. So I'm not worried about putting the title on the line against Chris Benoit, Owen Booth, or whoever you got, because I'm going to involve myself in a bunch of tag team matches and take it easy.
Okay. The Champagne Man?
Well, just David, when Mr. Gama Singh, the Great Gama, wasn't there, I told him what happened about Owen Hart, what he interfered. Me and the Makan Singh, we supposed to have the tag team champion, and what Owen do. You know about it. Let me say one thing. Everything the Great Gama told me was true. It seems like going here just in time. And let me tell you, since I've been here, I've been talking to the magistrates about the laws that have been being broken by the Hart family about Owen Hart, that pumpkin hiding behind his belt. Let me tell you, as a legal advisor for the Karachi Vice, the Champagne Man, the Great Gama Abu are going to reign supreme. The Karachi Vice, as long as Garfield Ports is the legal advisor, the sky's the limit for the Karachi Vice.
Okay. Conceded. These guys have stretch marks on their heads.
You got to admit it. You got a tough assignment. Owen Hart and Jason the Terrible. This could be your Waterloo. I hate to say that.
I know you love to say that, King Edward, but don't believe it, because those beer-belly sharecroppers out there know, you know in your heart, and I know there's no way that P-Brain and the spineless cockroach is going to beat the combination of Maka Singh and Bad News Allen, the Ultimate Warrior. This is going to be Christmas early because the spineless cockroach made me wait a long time before he got back in the ring with me, and he's going to hide, I'm sure, through the whole match behind that pea-brain who has no brain. The only thing he's got is power. When we get done with them, they're going to know what the law is about. They're going to know what true fear is about. No mercy.
No mercy.
You know what these two remind me of, Waylon? They remind me of two characters out of The Wizard of Oz. One has no brain and one has no courage. You can make up your own mind which one is which. But I'm going to tell you something. Simpleton behind the mask. When we get done with you tonight, Bad News Allen and I are going to set our sights on that North American belt that the little Omar's been hiding from us for too long now. He's been hiding it. He keeps tucking it away. He'll even come in the ring with an idiot with a mask just to have a tag match to stay away from us. Get ready, Omar, because one of us is going to get you, and it's going to be before you know it.
Okay, I wonder if they'll talk so big after the match, huh?
Now, I could wax poetic about the Karachi Vice, what it meant to me, which I do later on in the program with Trent. But I think it's important to hear what the Karachi Vice meant to the individuals involved. So I've plugged this book multiple times, The Tremendous Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling, written by a friend of the show and former guest in the first episode of the show, Heath McCoy. Because the way that this paragraph, or a few paragraphs I should say, is written, is done a lot more concisely, and it's a lot more pertinent than I could ever get to, and especially because you hear from the individuals itself. So I'm going to read this to really give you more context about my earlier comments regarding, if Stampede Wrestling, the territory was racist, if all the fans were racist, that kind of stuff. So once again, not my words. This is written by Heath McCoy, but you're going to hear words of the people in the Karachi Vice. And who better to tell you about the Karachi Vice than them? So, the Karachi Vice was the last evil army that the Noble Hearts would face in their hometown ring. From its earliest days, wrestling had exploited societal fears and racial stereotypes. The Karachi Vice, its name inspired from TV's Miami Vice, played on the attitudes of some audience members towards immigrants. That attitude had been made clear for years of chants of "Go home, Packy," and "Packy shit" raffled the rafters in every arena Gama Singh appeared in. Again, something that we had talked about previously. It continues. Gama, who was East Indian, played a despicable character to be sure. His most vile tactic was throwing fireballs into the faces of his enemies, an ancient trick from the homeland, or so the crowd was told. Gama got his biggest reaction when he fireballed Owen, which you heard that at the beginning of this program. As the Hearts baby boy laid sprawled across the canvas, writhing in pain, his supposedly charred face buried in his hands, the fans screamed for Gama's blood. People called Stu's house saying they were going to throw acid on me at the next match, Gama remembers. Stu really had to beef up security. Gama says that he never took issue with the racist chants rising from the audience. In fact, he fanned the flames. All that he meant I was doing my job, he says. That was my bread and butter. So, Gama was disappointed when when the show began airing on TSN. As the crowd erupted into a hearty round of racist chants, Waylon got onto the microphone and ordered them to stop. Listen, he lectured. This show is going nationwide and this is not the image we want to portray of Calgary. Without realizing it, Gama says, Ed was killing my heat. While Bruce takes credit for developing the Karachi Vice angle in 1986, Gama says it was his idea to partner up with Mike Shaw, a sweaty tub of blubber. What a tremendous phrase. From Michigan, with hair on his back to match the beard on his face. Shaw, who weighed in at 360 pounds, was a mid-card performer until the decision was made to put a turban on his head and rename him Makan Singh. We cooked up this contrived notion about Makan being a born-again Pakistani, whatever the hell that meant, says Bruce with a high laugh. But it worked. Bruce being Bruce Hart, part of the Hart family, and the family behind the promotion of Stampede Wrestling, just to clarify anything for the fans listening at home. Overnight, the Karachi Vice became cult sensation. Shaw remembers walking with his wife in downtown Calgary when a can of Coca-Cola whizzed by their heads. He turned around to see a carload of teens giving him the finger and shouting, "Karachi Vice sucks!" I kept thinking, what a white guy, and giving him an Indian name, it just drove people crazy, says Shaw. If Shaw's gimmick riled up the audience, his sharp tongue worked them into a frenzy. In interviews with Whalen, he frequently belittled Calgary, rubbing it in when the Calgary Flames lost a game, mocking the Calgary Tower as a symbol of phallic inadequacy. Shaw claims that just before the 1988 Winter Olympics, he received a letter from then-Mayor Ralph Klein. It said that they were trying to promote Calgary as being a kind, loving Western city, and they wanted me to hold off on my negative comments before the Olympics, Shaw says. Of course, I got worse after that. If anyone's going to believe what's said in a wrestling match and not come to Calgary, they couldn't have been sound mind anyway. At the gimmick's height around 1988, there was even a Karachi Vice fan club. While the Hearts sold Karachi Vice t-shirts, fans often showed up wearing t-shirts of their own, bearing insulting slogans such as Karachi Mice and Karachi Lice. A popular poster for sale at the matches featured Mike Shaw, then known as Makan Singh, wearing a toilet seat on his head. This was appropriate as the baby faces had taken to calling him the Toilet Bowl. What a name. While Shaw and Gama were the nucleus of the Karachi Vice, at various times the group also included such creeps such as Steve DeSalvo, Ron Starr, Carrie Brown, and frizzy-haired female wrestler Rhonda Singh. There was a plan to put the 260-pound woman in a bikini and have her come to the ring as the Karachi Queen, but that never materialized. Karachi Vice made every effort to portray itself as a grotesque group of deviants, bragging to Whalen about their dressing room orgies with women who supposedly found them irresistible. On these decadent occasions, the Vice dined, they said, on zesty barbecued eel and Karachi Cooler, which according to the wrestling programs, consisted of scotch and cream soda. Now there's a drink! The Vice found themselves a manager in the form of Abu Wizal. Outside the ring, he was Milad Ilazan, I'm saying that last name incorrectly, so I apologize, from Beirut, a hardcore wrestling fan who moved to Calgary in 1970 at the age of 10. Standing just over 5 feet tall and weighing about 130 pounds, he never imagined that he would be a character in the Hearts roving circus until Bruce stuck him in Arab robes and dark sunglasses, dispatching him to the ring to cheat on behalf of the bad guys. So you can kind of see how, yes, obviously there is racist undertones in certain segments of the population. It doesn't matter where you are. If it's here in Winnipeg, if it's in anywhere in the States, if it's anywhere in England, if this just exists. In a society, it exists. But what they did, they being Karachi Vice, and more specifically as Great Gama, did such a tremendous job to use that against the patrons, to rile them up even further, to make them pay the money to go to the shows to see him get his ass kicked. It's an incredible marketing scheme, and to me, it just shows the brilliance of Gama, because there's a lot of people who would get scared about having an arena of thousands of people essentially wanting to murder you, and they would not want that kind of notoriety or heat or whatever, so they would very much be okay bowing out of that situation and maybe doing something a little bit different. But he met it head on and really cemented his legacy with the Stampede Wrestling audience, and like I said, with Canadian wrestling fans forever, in my opinion. So that's kind of the breakdown of Gama's career, of how the Karachi Vice was born. It was not, it wasn't a 20-year run, and it wasn't like the NWO where they kept adding and kept adding and kept adding, and all of a sudden there was 30 people. Got a bit bloated at the end, but realistically, it was a stable that worked, and it served its purpose, and it generated the buzz, which in turn generated the revenue that was sorely needed by Stampede Wrestling at that point in time. Now, to further dive deep into the career of Gama Singh, as well as to further speak about the Karachi Vice, and to really go into Gama Singh's time with Impact Wrestling and the Desi Hit Squad, Desi Hit Squad, as you will come to hear, I'm going to bring it over to my interview with Trent. But before that, I'm going to play one more classic audio clip, and then on the other side, my interview with Trent Zuberi. Please enjoy.
Karachi Vice, Jerry Morrow, the Champagne Man.
Well, for Jim Davis, I want to congratulate Gama Singh. And the Karachi Vice is hot now. Now it's my turn, and the Maka Singh. Mon champion and mon champagne.
Okay, and the Great Gama, you're looking very smug.
You know, Jim Davies, this is totally humiliating. It's actually embarrassing for me to go out to Edmonton and look at it in the second match. Can you imagine a Commonwealth mid-heavyweight champion man of my caliber, a top star throughout the world? I got to put up with this kind of, whatever you want to call it, against a little punk, a local hero, whatever you want to call him, Chris Benoit. Well, I hope he hasn't forgotten the last time I chased him away right out of this country. Kid, you got some more waiting for you as soon as you step in that ring with me.
Okay, a very confident Great Gama. Moving on to Muckin Singh.
Edmonton, let me tell you one thing. Putting Pillman and Bruce Hart in a match with us for the tag team titles, that's just like having Easter and Christmas on the same day. That's what it's going to be like. Taking the presents, stealing everything. That's how confident I am. Camrose, $5,000 Battle Royal. They must be robbing a bank. There ain't that much money in the whole little hick town. Castor, isn't that what they do to bulls?
Always the sense of humor in here.
All right, my next guest coming up, you may know him from various things such as AAW, such as the We Talk Impact podcast, such as the Backstage Boys Listen to Me Talk podcast, or from a lesser, far away known podcast, the old Six-Sided Podcast. But very happy to be joined on the line right now by Trent Zuberi. Trent, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Taxman. How you doing, man?
Good, very good. It's been a minute. I think the last time that we had a online discussion, I had joined you on the TNI show.
Yeah, you were there for a Thursday review. Was it 6 months ago?
Yeah, it's got to be about that for sure.
Maybe. Time just flies, man. You know, this has been the last. Well, it's going on 2 years now. The last 2 years seems like they've just a blink of an eye have just gone by like out of nowhere. So, yeah, it could have been about 6 months ago. I'll have to go back in the old archives to take a look.
Well, especially for yourself, because I don't know how many goddamn hats you manage to wear at any given time, but yeah, a busy man is putting it very, very lightly. So before we get into this program, because there are literally thousands more listeners than I ever had on the old Six-Sided Podcast, tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we get into today's subject matter.
Yeah, well, I'm a Chicago guy, and as you said, a lot of hats. You know, I am a full-time job, family guy and everything, but also I work for AAW Pro in Chicago, which is one of the top indie groups in the country here. As a producer, I also do play in two bands. My primary band, Hemi, which is a metal band, and then a punk band called Toxic Rocket. Fit those into there. I do a production-based podcast called the Backstage Boys podcast with alongside my friend Basil. He's a photographer for many of the big groups, and we talk about backstage production and whatnot. And then the Total Nonstop Impact podcast, which is the number one Impact Wrestling podcast network on the planet, basically. So we do the throwbacks, the Asylum show. There's the Thursday post-show review after Impact and Access, pay-per-view reviews, the whole thing. So all that. Plus, I still manage to call my parents every day, so it's doable. It's very doable.
Just barely, hey?
Yes, you got it.
And just on the topic of AAW, you've done some play-by-play as well.
Yeah, I ventured into that this year. Our commentary team is Joe Dombrowski, who was Ring of Honor's commentator, and Tyler Volz, who is a Chicago guy or Midwest guy, and basically, when either one of those could not make the last few shows, a couple shows that they like, one Joe couldn't make, so they asked me to sit in with Tyler, and then vice versa. When Tyler couldn't make it, I sat in with Joe. It is an amazing experience to do play-by-play and color commentary. We all think we can do it. Like we put the volume down on the TV, or we all kind of narrate a game or a wrestling match in our head sometimes. And until you do it, it truly is an art. And being alongside somebody like a Joe Dombrowski, who's such a seasoned veteran for many, many years in the Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania area, and Tyler's been doing it for many years. Like, these guys are just artists, man. And I was just like, wow. It took a little bit to kind of get going with it. You think you can just jump in and you're just talking, but man, it's an art. It really is an art to paint an audio picture of what you're seeing in the ring. It's really, really cool.
Well, and especially for yourself, because you have such a unique perspective, being that you've done the backstage work, you've done the production side of things, you've done the podcasting where you're either reviewing what you've just seen on television live, or you're going back into the archives and reviewing things from the past. So you already have all of these different seasonings, we'll say. But yeah, when you're trying to make that complete dish on play-by-play, that's got to be something completely different.
Yeah, it was cool. It was a very, like I said, I jumped in thinking, I talk all the time with these podcasts, but like, man, you really have to envision the fact that you're narrating a visual. And it's not that you're narrating for radio or anything, but you're enhancing the visual that you're showing to people on TV. So it's really cool. You're responsible for enhancing that product, and running commentary, kind of takes on things. Doing a podcast is one thing, but enhancing a visual to me is what using verbal skills is a whole other ball of wax. But it was really cool. It was really, really fun. An experience I'll never forget. And I'm open to doing it any time they need me to do it again.
Well, I, for one, am hoping that you get the opportunity again. Because, like I said, I saw it on Twitter. I think Truck was all about it. And
yes.
And I was like, what? Because, I'm in and out of Twitter quite often, with personal life and whatever. But, so I saw that and I was like, holy shit. And then having to, go back and listen to it and actually hear you make the call, like, hats off to you, man. It's not an easy avenue to just step in, but I thought you did a fantastic job, and I really hope that you're able to get a few more cracks at it in the near future.
I appreciate it. So you mentioned Truck. You're in Winnipeg, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
You're in Winnipeg, and he's right
next door, yeah.
in Saskatchewan. So yeah, one of these days you have to meet in the middle at some point. He's another legend. One of the other good Canadians on my friends list, alongside you. So
well, we can meet in the middle as long as he's not going to wear any Saskatchewan Rough Riders gear, because then we might have a situation.
He's somebody you should interview just from a fan perspective. He is a wonderful guy to talk to. At some point, I would love for you guys to just get together and discuss just Canadian wrestling, just fandom. Like he really has a great take on stuff. So. Keep him in mind at some point.
It's funny you mentioned that. So when I made my appearance on Total Nonstop Impact, I had kind of thrown it out there, like, what are some topics that you guys were kind of interested in hearing in regards to Canadian wrestling history. Unbeknownst to you guys, and the listeners of this show will know because I brought it up a few times, before I started this podcast, I had storyboarded the entire first year. So from January till December, every topic has already been decided. This is before I even hit record on the first episode of the Stu Hart program. So when I was discussing with you guys something that you would like to see, and then you had brought up what we're going to be discussing today, and I'm looking at the board and I'm trying to no-sell it because we're live on air, and we're doing the video portion, so there's me. I'm like, I'm going to let this one go. But funny enough, that's somebody who I'm going to be discussing something with in the near future. But the reason that we're talking about our subject today is Gama Singh and Karachi Vice. Now, when you had brought that up, I found that very interesting, and maybe some people not familiar with yourself or with your work with Total Nonstop Impact might wonder why a guy from Chicago would be so interested in Gama Singh and Karachi Vice. So before we really dive into it, what was your first kind of involvement or your first time seeing or hearing about Gama Singh and Karachi Vice?
First time ever was I bought, I think I bought it from RF Video. It was a tribute to Owen Hart, and it had a lot of his Calgary Stampede stuff on it. And I remember a lot of his feud was against the Karachi Vice. Now, the funny story is my parents are originally from Karachi. Okay, so that's Pakistan. So I was like, huh. I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, because it's not a city you hear about a lot in terms of like wrestling, right? Like you'll hear they'll talk India if anything, but Karachi is really not mentioned a lot. And I'm like, it's interesting, and I'm like, Karachi Vice. So I started exploring into it and obviously looking into it more and just kind of learning more about it and whatnot. And and I remember asking my mom, like, you're here the Karachi Vice? She's like, no. And she's like my mom's extent of wrestling was Antonio Inoki one time came to Karachi in the 60s, in the late 60s, or early 70s, like 71 or something, and fought had a match against one of the local guys or something. It was like a big showcase. That was my mom's extent, aside from what she picked up from me here and there. But they'd never heard of it. So I was like, I remember discovering that Muck and Singh was Bastion Booker, later on, and I was like, what the? I'm like,
yeah,
from Karachi. I'm like, I remember thinking even watching. I'm like, hey, he does not look Pakistani at all, but hey, from the north. A lot of the people in the northern part of Pakistan are real fair skins. I'm like, oh, maybe he's from the north, and like, but learning he was Bastion Booker, like, what the hell is this, And then Gama was Indian. I was like, what? The whole thing was a lie. Like the whole Karachi Vice was a lie to me. But it was cool just to learn about it. I mean, it was just like, it was cool to see that and just get that little taste, especially being much younger and whatnot. So this is funny.
It's so interesting, and I'm sure it came up in our early conversations back when we used to do our old programs about you're getting to know the Karachi Vice and obviously Gama Singh as well. It's so fascinating to me that a second generation, I don't want to use the term foreigner. That's such an awful thing to say, but
it's fun.
Well, but your roots are from Pakistan, and then a Canadian or an Indo-Canadian wrestler who starts a group from the place that your parents are from. Just like, what a wild series of events, hey?
It was nuts, man. Especially when I got to meet Gama and Raj, his son, at the Impact tapings in Philly, and I remember just hitting it off with Gama and telling him, just telling him a little bit of what I'm basically telling you as well, and just how funny it was, and we started. I mean, I don't know exactly what region of India he's from, but the language was the same because there was the whole basically Pakistan was carved out of India, so like there's a lot of carryover and whatnot. So
yes,
we knew the language was the same. So I knew. We just kind of started going back and forth a little bit with some terminology. I was like, what a trip this is. I'm sitting here talking to Gama Singh, one of the best, and it was like such a legendary wrestler, especially in Canada, and just shooting the breeze with him, at the ECW arena. Like,
of all places.
What a weird moment, But I love he was especially his resurgence and everything, and you just kind of get to know him more at this time. But it was just awesome. Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, he's originally from Punjab, India. But I mean, like you said, there's so much crossover and everything else.
Yeah, that's like one of these disputed parts of India and Pakistan. I mean, there's such carryover between the two sides, and it's a frivolous war basically that they've been fighting for 50 plus or no more 75, 80 years at this point. So
well, it's the same thing as like my background is Croatian, but there's like the Croatian and Serbian, and then it's like what place belongs to who and all this whatever.
You know?
It's the same stuff, right?
Same thing, same exact thing, man. That whole, I don't know what, you don't even know what the hell they're fighting for anymore. You know?
I don't even think they know anymore. They knew about 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
So funny. Not now though.
So you were saying that you were really introduced during the tribute to Owen Hart. Now, did you see many of the matches that Gama and Owen were able to have?
Yeah, I have them on VHS. You know, I
Oh,
watched
wow.
them. Yeah, I have them on this tape, and it's a rare tape, and it just got put. It was put together. It was actually put together prior to Owen's death, and I remember getting it, and it was like, I was a huge Owen guy. He was just one of my absolute favorites, and when I called our video to see what they had, and they said, hey, we have this tape. We're just we added a few more things to it, and we're just, it's a little tribute to Owen. I said, yeah, I'll take it. So it's a VHS. It's a very rare piece, but his entire feud with the Karachi Vice is on there. It's pretty crazy. I haven't watched it in years, but I still do have a VCR, which I can watch it on, but the actual VHS is still at my parents' house. I have my DVDs made it to my place, but my VHS collection, I got to get out of their basement at some point. But but those matches were great. Like, it was just, I'm an old school guy. I love less formulaic wrestling. Like nowadays it's very paint by numbers in a sense. It's a lot of formula. In those days they played off of the crowd more. It was very impulsive. It was they knew how to read the ring. Read the room and all that stuff. So it had a lot more natural energy to it. And Stampede was one of those big ones for it. And Owen was great at it. Owen was explosive. He was they always talk about how he kind of saved the territory after everybody was leaving and whatnot. So that feud to me was like one of the pivotal feuds of Calgary, of Stampede. And it's like, I think this is truly it doesn't get enough credit because people talk about long-standing feuds of territories like Freebirds and Von Erichs and things like that. But man, the Hart versus Karachi Vice feud should not be overlooked. This is actually a pretty damn good feud if you really delve into it.
And they did such a great job of, and we're going to get into this as well, of playing with the local hero makes good story, which is, like you said, it's such a simple story, but they executed it so well. And then you have this stable of heels like Gama, and you have, like you said, Makan Singh, and Kerry Brown was in there, and Vakan Singh, and everybody else, right? Yeah. You have, and they can all talk, they can all cut a promo, but they're all, more than that, they're all believable. You believe them as they're really out to get the local guy. So then when you have Owen, and you are completely correct that he really did start that resurgence of Stampede in the 80s, because they were, late 70s, they were on their bit of a downswing. I believe that's when guys like the Stomper was gone. Bad News Allen, I don't think was there quite yet. So there was quite a bit of turnover in the territory. So you have this now local boy. Well, how do you really make him? You need that real great foil, that real great bad guy to go against. And there was no better group of bad guys than the Karachi Vice.
Absolutely, man. They were a good heel. I'm telling you, it's overlooked because one of those things that the Stampede tapes are so rare. They don't get put out there as much. And it's one of those types of it's just one of those cases where if they were more widely available, more clips on Twitter or something, people would see it more. And it just takes people putting it out there. So I encourage anyone, if you have the tapes, if you have them digitized, feel free to share them. There's some Twitter accounts I've seen share some of those old clips and things like that. But man, don't let these things just kind of fade away. Put them back. I'm a big proponent of if material exists, put it into the world rather than keep it on a hard drive or on a shelf. So hopefully people can put that. And I should introspect on that. I have the VHS. I should digitize this and do the same. I really should put that out there because I think it's rare stuff and it needs to live on.
It's funny you say that because wrestling historians, and I'm not going to paint everybody with the same brush, but sure. There's a certain section of wrestling historians who are very much, I own this and it's mine. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So the ones who own footage of Stampede, or they own footage of Mid-South, or they own footage of whatever. Name your territory, name your part of the world, whatever. World Championship in Australia or whatever. There are people who own this, but it's theirs. They own it, so they will never put it out, which is a shame because it's out there and we know it's out there, but if nobody can see it, then it's like, okay, there's only so much you can read in books like, Heath McCoy's Stampede Wrestling book or like in Bret Hart's book or in whatever. You can read till the cows come home, right? But if you can't physically see it, it's totally different. It's a shame, like you said, that a lot of this is just kind of stored on bookshelves or stored away wherever, and it's not being digitized. And I understand what you're saying, guys like you who have these VHS tapes and whatever, and to a point I get it, but there's a vast library and of resources that I know personally as well that people have that they just don't want it out there, and I don't understand why that is.
Yeah, I think some of it's time too. I can easily say, I should be doing it, but it's I mentioned at the top of the show the things I do. It's like, when am I going to find time to sit down and digitize this stuff?
Well, and you're not cutting out a phone call with your parents either. Let's be real.
Right. Absolutely not. Not for mucking sing. It's just not going to happen. Nah, but it's one of those things where if you want to, you'll do it. If you have time. But I truly encourage. We could also look at the source too. All these a lot of these tapes are housed at over there in Stamford, Connecticut. So it'd be nice if they start digitizing some of the stuff and putting it on their network and all that stuff. Who knows? But at least we know it exists. It's out there, and if you ever want to find it, personally, between you and I would think if you're the talent, I'm thinking I know Gama's an older guy, but maybe tell his son hey man, put my stuff out there, get me over, put the kids to work, or find some fans who are hey, listen, I'll pay you a couple bucks. Here's some tapes. Can you digitize and tweet this out? And this is not the sidebar too much, but man, it blew my mind during the lockdown when there was no shows going on, how few wrestlers really put out their own material.
Very few.
And I was shocked, especially ones who are signed to TV. And I was man, you guys have an endless array of photos and clips and videos. And why wasn't your Twitter? When there's no shows and you're all stuck at home, I am man, this is the perfect time to just put all a photo a day, a clip a day, just blast the internet with your stuff. Just so you're hey, you know what? I'm gonna use this time to get over. Some did now. Some absolutely did, but many didn't, man. And it blew my mind. So I'm thinking, it does rely on the talent, too, because for me, I'm very proud of the work I've done and anything. So to me, I'm man, I just want to put that stuff out there. So if it's, if I'm a talent, hey, man, hey, Gama, hire the grandkids or something. Hey, kids, I'll pay you some money, start clipping Grandpa's stuff and start putting it out. Whatever it is. But hopefully that stuff gets to live on.
Not that I don't want to telegraph next month's episode already, and this is a discussion we can have off air, but next month's episode, during my research and during interviews with one of the guests, I found out that this person actually has every championship match that they ever wrestled on film. And
oh, wow.
And they're deceased now, but somebody is in possession of that, and if my memory serves, and I'm gonna have to re-listen to the audio that I have. That is in the process of getting digitized. So there's gonna be, hopefully, in the coming year, maybe a couple of years, because it's a lot of film. So there could be a lot of stuff coming down the pipe in the next couple of years. But that's a conversation that I'm gonna have to save for our next month's episode.
Oh, okay, cool.
But like I said, we'll discuss that off air. But in terms of Gama Singh, so you had mentioned you saw him during the Stampede tapes, but then you had the up close and personal experience with him with his latest run with Impact Wrestling. Can you tell me how and some of this I know because we've discussed this previously, but for everybody listening at home, how did you come about meeting him, and what was your first impression of meeting him, the man, versus meeting him on tape from an FMW tape?
Oh, so yeah, the reintroduction via Impact, that was one thing. So kind of seeing that and getting to reintroduced to him and that way and everything with the AC Hit Squad and all that stuff. And I got really close with Rohit Raju because he works here at AAW a lot under his other moniker, Hakeem Zain. So I got to know him pretty well. We hit it off really well. And then so I knew him. So when I was in Philly for those tapings, I went to go say hello to him. Raj was familiar with me because I spoke on Twitter a little bit. And then I said, is your father? I'd love to just meet your father. And he was there, and he introduced me to his dad. And I met his dad, and we just started shooting the shit a little bit and just talking, and just a sweet guy, reminding me of like hanging out with my uncles, like it was just like,
Yeah.
I was just in there talking to him like as if I would talk to one of my uncles and stuff. But Rohit would always put him over so much as just such a wealth of knowledge and such a good guy, and like the teachings he gets from him and everything like that. It was incredible to hear the respect Rohit had. Because the thing is interesting with Rohit though, he's half Indian. His mother was Indian, his father was black, and he wasn't. And his mom, I believe he told me, she was raised by somebody else, or she was not in touch too much with her Indian roots as much.
Yes.
So he never got much exposure to it. Like, he doesn't know the language and didn't know much of the culture because his mom was so separated from it and whatnot. So for him, it was a learning experience to be around Gama. And just to learn the culture, and Gama would teach him as like an uncle would, in a sense, So it was interesting because I was just talking to Rohit about that, and he was like, "Yeah," he goes, "I'm learning more now talking to Gama than I ever did as a kid." So it was very interesting in that regard. But yeah, just getting to meet him that way, and talk to Raj, about maybe one day getting him to the U.S. and seeing what we can do, some indies and stuff. But he got hurt, so it didn't work out. So he was hurt, and I would love to maybe if things hadn't shut down, it would have been nice to have Raj and Gama, both come out. Would have been really cool. So, but we'll see. You never know what the future holds on that.
I remember when, and they pronounce it the Desi Hit Squad, and that's a whole conversation that we're going to get into right away. But I remember when they were first introduced and they first started teasing that stable, because that was the very early stages of both of our former programs that we used to do. Yeah. So you and I were very high on, like, immediately we were like, this is going to be awesome. And we were so excited for it, and it came and went, and it was, to quote myself, flatter than a plate full of piss. Like, I know that you and I were.
That term. I love
you and I were so disappointed because, and I'll speak for myself, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure.
But when I saw the look, when I saw the style, when I saw the music and the ambiance and everything that they were bringing to the table with Gama Singh, with putting Rohit and that whole stable together, I was like, man, this could be like the top heel group in professional wrestling if they would do it, if they would not go back to the old formula, but do a play off of it. I'm not saying like, oh, these evil foreigners, but you could have these guys who come from a different background, who wrestle a different way, who are more violent because they do things a different way, etc. There were so many avenues that they could have pursued, and we ended up getting comedy.
It was comedy, and they never got credible wins.
No, they never did.
They never. The reason, like using the Karachi Vice as the example, the reason that worked was like they got wins. They were able to one up all these baby faces and look like these dominant heels, and yeah, they'd get their comeuppance later on. But the Hit Squad never got a moment. They were constantly losing. I was like, how do you build a credible ensemble group when you're constantly having them lose, and then on top of that, the comedy. Now, comedy can work.
Yes, it can, 100%.
It can work, especially if the guys are getting some wins, and then then you have the old fall in the banana peel comedy that the heel, he lost. I'm like by a joke, and he can react all strongly and whatnot. But they were losing clean every time, and on top of which there was comedy. I'm like, you can't have both, though. You cannot have both here and expect credibility from this. So it was such a mess the way it was handled. I'm like, why? I just don't understand why it was handled that way. You brought in Gama. You're doing all this. You have a great ringleader in Rohit, and I'm like, what in the hell is going on here? But so mishandled to me, so beyond mishandled.
I remember when that whole angle was going. Well, not even angle, because they really didn't get off the ground with anything. But when that group was active, well, that's a better way to phrase it. And every week you and I would watch, and every week we would just talk between ourselves of like, what is going on? Because, and then the other part for me that was very frustrating, and it was disappointing. And and for everybody listening at home, I know we don't normally talk about current or modern day wrestling, but this is one of the very few times where somebody from wrestling or Canadian wrestling history, the past, is now interjected in the present. And he's still active, I believe, with Impact in some way, shape, or form. But getting back to this whole quote-unquote Desi hit squad, and again, we're going to cover that in a second. But for me, it was one thing for the group to get jobbed out like they were, but then you have now wrestling fans who have never seen Gama Singh before are looking at him of like why is this guy important? Who is this guy? Because he just looks like a feckless leader, and this is not the guy who's throwing fireballs in Owen Hart's face in Stampede Wrestling, right? This is not a guy who was walking down the streets of Calgary and getting death threats because he was going against. Now he was just presented. I'm sorry, I'm getting hot here, but it was so frustrating for me because there was so much promise and there was so much potential and there was so many avenues that could have been explored to further even not just Gama's story, but like Indian wrestlers in North American wrestling, because again, that's something that's not well used or not well pursued or whatever. You have the stereotypes, and that's another conversation. But to me, the whole thing was just it was just one big ball of frustration.
Well, what got me about it was, it's like, number one, you didn't give it to a new viewer. Like, you and I knew who he was, but like, man, to most viewers, they didn't know who Gama was, right? So why not show some old clips? Why not build the credibility? Be like, hey, this is fucking Gama Singh. Sorry if I can't swear on this, but this is Gama Singh. And it's like you said, that death threats on the streets of Calgary, the fireballs, he was an evil heel. Like, show that, and then be like, he's bringing all that to these two young boys who he's going to teach and, make as dastardly as him. None of it. It was like, here's Gama Singh, here's an interview. And what killed me, Taxman, about this was that you have Scott and Don, who are two Canadians who grew up on Gama Singh, who grew up watching this guy. And you guys didn't think to do anything? Like, why didn't you think you should put him over? Like, yeah, I know you guys know who he is. Like, clearly Don was a big fan of his. We know, you could see it in the interactions. Don was a huge Gama Singh guy. But, my God, Don, like, why didn't you feel like you needed to build that same kind of cred for the U.S. audience and the modern day audience who's just getting exposed to him now? I mean, come on, like, you can't just throw the guy out there and be like, here you go, here's Gama Singh. Like, no, he's a freaking legend, like, let's show him off a little bit. Nothing. So
I don't know if you're familiar with this, and it's been canceled for a long time now, but Don and Lance Storm used to have that podcast, Killing the Town. Did you ever hear any of that?
I loved it. I used to love that show.
Okay, so did you hear the one when they had Gama Singh on?
Yes, I sure did. And you can just hear the adoration in Don's voice with that one.
So in that program, they do a tremendous job of talking about the background, talking about how evil he was as a heel, as the bad guy. They spent time going into what he meant in Calgary and abroad, and what he meant what it meant for him to be such a dastardly foil for the good guys and whatever. See, you have, and it was like maybe 6 months later he was on television, and it's not the same guy. It's like they did that part, and I'm not saying this is what they did, so please don't misquote me, but it's almost like they did that podcast, and they're like, let's use none of that at all, and let's do this totally different whatever, and what we got was just very frustrating.
It was just weird. Like, to me, it's like you know what you should have done, and you guys didn't. And I don't know. It felt like a rush job. Much of like some of my frustration with Impact today. It just feels like a rush job in certain areas, and it's not really being long-term thought out for things to work. And I was disappointed. Now, I understand he's still under contract. Obviously, things got a little bit thrown off with the lockdown and him not being able to travel and being a little bit older. So I'm assuming they'll find a way to tie him back in at some point. I just don't know how. Now you do, maybe with Raj as a solo. I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see where they go with it.
So I've alluded to it a few times. So Impact would call them the Desi Hit Squad.
Yeah.
I was taught very early on by yourself it would be pronounced the Desi Hit Squad. So can you just explain that one to everybody listening at home?
Just the pronunciation is Desi. It means from what my dad told me, it means like Desi's like a man of the land of the South Asian land is a Desi. And I think the pronunciation is very simple. It's like they saying the words they see, like they see this coming. They see that's it. They see Hit Squad. That's what all the word is. And it would kill me that Josh Matthews would be like, Desi Hit Squad. I'm like, there's no Z in this. There's no Z anywhere to be Desi. You could see, I could not, it would blow my mind. And I remember I would rant on it on the show. And then, like, the following tapings, you'd hear Josh Matthews correct himself. And I'd be like, oh, he's clearly listening to us. Because I would go off on it, right? And then he'd fall right back into it. And then everybody, Desi Hit Squad, Desi. I'm like, guys, it's not Desi Arnaz here, okay? I get it. Like, you're saying Desi Arnaz, who's spelled the same way, whatever. Desi Hit Squad. I'm like, hey, somebody back there, like, there's a couple Indian guys back there. Can you guys correct him? Like, somebody tell. I don't know. Like, it's a small thing, but it would just make me laugh. Like, you can clearly say the words they see. Like, they see that they're pronouncing this wrong. So just say it like that. Oh my God, mind blowing.
But does this not play into something a little more? I'm not going to say nefarious because that's not the way to say it. But does this play into a little bit more of wrestling's lack of understanding of different cultures? And I'm talking about, now we're strictly speaking about modern professional wrestling, because
absolutely,
back in the territory days, you would have, and we're going to push the whole racism aspect aside for just a second, because that will be a topic I think that we're going to come up to in a second, but you would have guys like Fritz von Erich in Dallas who would play a German SS officer, because not in a quote-unquote racist way, but in a way because he's a bad guy. The German SS were bad guys. It was a character that he had cultivated and used in that arena. You had Gama Singh in Calgary. Same thing. He was playing off his Indian heritage to predominantly, white. They call it Texas of Canada, as Alberta. But so he's playing this character for that type of wrestling fan. You would have guys in the Montreal territory like Dino Bravo or like Edward Carpentier who were the Frenchmen, and they would go to different territories as that Frenchman. You have all of these individuals from very unique cultures who were very much allowed to portray this culture, this style, this flavor, if you will. And now in professional wrestling, it seems like if you have somebody of specifically of color, because we see it all the time, they're either not allowed to be that type of individual because, oh, that's racist, quote unquote, that would be depending on how they're presented, of course, or they're presented as a caricature. So you have somebody like Rohit Raju, who just is, you could play so much off of what he does, what his background is, but it's never talked about, it's never discussed, whatever. Same thing with Gama when he was in Impact. Same thing with Jinder Mahal in WWE. Same thing with, you go on and on and on and on down the list. It's almost like nowadays wrestling is more concerned with being a caricature of itself rather than having these, real life people with real life backstories who come from real places. I don't know, maybe we should play that up instead of, no, we're gonna give you a gimmick name and now you're this. It's so odd.
Well, look at the pure ignorance in this. Going right back to the root of all this, they were calling the group Karachi Vice, and not a single guy was from Karachi or Pakistan in the group at all.
Yes.
Like, the ignorance of that is hilarious to me. It's like, guys, you could at least just called it, like, I don't know, Delhi Vice, because at least Gama's Indian, right? Like,
yeah.
But, like, you had 3 white guys in the Karachi Vice. I was like, guys, can you at least, I don't know, okay, you have the one credible South Asian guy, but, like, then don't call, why Karachi at that point? Because it ends with an I, like Miami Vice, because that was the play off of it.
Yes.
They were going off of Miami Vice. I mean, you can go to Delhi Vice, or something else, but I was like, the sheer ignorance of that, it blows my mind. But wrestling's always been that way. It's beyond culturally, like, devoid of background knowledge. I don't know what it is. Right down to pronouncing it Desi. Like, you're a commentator. Take a second, make sure, go talk to Gama and say, hey, anything I can touch on culturally, anything I'm doing wrong, check in on those kind of things. Make sure that I'm presenting this well enough. Again, it's not because I'm offended or something like that as a South Asian descendant, but it's just more like it's credibility building. I immediately picked up on the wrong pronunciation. Immediately, and I'm not even the most culturally in tune person. Like, I don't go all crazy, and I'm not like, gonna make a stink about it. I'm not even big on celebrating a lot of the stuff. But I caught it right away. And to me, it immediately kills, like, that little bit of credibility. It's like, did you do your research? I mean, come on, like, you're a broadcasted program here. So things like that are just, it's always been that way. All the promotions have always had this odd ignorance when it comes to other cultures. And it's so funny to me how that happens. It's like, you have a whole group of people back there, backstage, educated people, office people, and it's like, nobody ever speaks up and just says, hey, wait a minute, guys. Let's fine-tune this a little bit. So, just funny stuff, man.
Yeah, it's only in wrestling. Like, I've used that phrase a few times now, but it's absolutely true. It's just... But yeah, to me, it almost seems like, and specifically speaking about the Daisy Hit Squad, that you could have used... Like, that, it would have made the presentation that much more special and important, but instead we go to the old wrestling tropes and we got what we got, which was very disappointing. Is how we can tie this whole thing together.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It just falls back into its own thing. I feel like it's a lot of reasons why sometimes wrestling has the reputation it does. It's because it doesn't set itself to a certain standard. And that happens. That absolutely happens, unfortunately. So, whatever it is, man, I don't think it'll change much, even now.
No, I don't think it's going to change in our lifetime, unfortunately. But it would, I don't know. And I'm like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, I don't even know how to phrase this properly, but I'm not saying that, like, every person has to be blank from blank, because that's not the proper way to go about it either. But you can definitely use some cultural touchstones to influence that individual's, on air persona. I hate using the word character, but you understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yep.
And it would just in the case of the Daisy Hit Squad, it just I think you and I are in complete agreement that would have really enhanced what they were able to bring to the table, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. It could have been so much more. I think now it's too late, especially with, it worked out for Rohit. Let's be honest, it definitely worked out for him. He was able to break away, have a solo run, finally get the X Division title, showcase what he can actually do, which I knew working with him here at AAW, but I knew what he was capable of. I'm glad Impact got to see that. From what I'm told, is that the upper brass there saw the promos we were cutting for him here in Chicago at AAW, and they were like, "Oh, we didn't know he could talk that well." They just started, and they went with the solo run because we really pushed him heavy.
Yes.
And I think they saw that, and then when I'm told they saw that, and they were like, "Yeah, they got wind of that." And they were like, "Hey, this guy really knows what he's doing out there." So it worked out for him. He's been a little bit pushed back down now, but yeah, man, I just think it could have been more at the time. You could have put it this way: his breakaway from it could have meant more had the group had more credibility.
Yes, 100%.
Obviously it was by default because they the pandemic, locked everything down and whatnot. And they couldn't really continue the Hit Squad. But yeah, I mean, his breakaway was just kind of by default. But yeah, it could have meant a lot. He could have really had something, even down to him burning the kurta that he was wearing. Like yeah, I'm done with this. Like something to give it something. But it didn't really go that way. So, have Gama send in some promos, have Raj film something. We're seeing what's going on. If we could be there, we'd take care of you, and one day we'll get back. I don't know, just something to act like you gave a shit about it.
Yeah, rather than unfortunately what we got.
Yeah, that's all. So it was weird. It was just a very. You know what's funny? It almost like it had the same laziness to it in terms of like the thought process behind the Karachi Vice not even having a Pakistani in it.
Yes.
It's that same whatever, throw a couple guys in there. It's like that's what this was. Whatever, just put them out there. Hey, that's why the Indian gimmick will never ever get that respect that it really should. And I think, speaking of Gama, his nephew is Jinder Mahal, correct?
Yes.
From what I understand, and I don't watch their program much, but from what I understand, they made him more of a killer than anything. I mean, as far as previous Indian characters go, from what I understand, they made him a champion, but I know they did present him like a stronger kind of killer than previous, like the what's his name, Kali and all those guys were, I guess, right?
They did for a certain amount of time, and then they went the standard WWE thing where it's then he's a comedy act, and then you just bury the guy, because there was a period of time there when he was a champ, and credit to them because they actually did present him as a credible champion. Far too many times you see a guy who's just he has the belt, but he's not he's not the guy, you can tell. So credit to them, they actually did do a fairly good job of the initial presentation, but then it goes back to something that you had just said, right? Wrestling just continues to not present the Indian culture, if that's a proper way to say it, as something that's sustainably presentable, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think it takes work. You guys they gotta think about it. You gotta put some thought into these kind of things, and if you really give a shit about it, you'll do it right. So I think sometimes they get backburnered, but we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And then like you said earlier, can't wait to see if Gama does make a reappearance with Impact Wrestling, and if he does, maybe they'll do it right. Cross your fingers.
Yeah, we'll see, man. We'll see.
All right, so as we start to wrap up this section of the program, do you have any closing thoughts on either Gama or the Karachi Vice?
No, just really cool stuff. It's a fun thing to watch. I absolutely feel like they were a good heel group to watch. Very 80s, 1980s style heel group. So if you're going to go discover it, don't expect, NWO levels of complete chaos and takeover. They're not spray painting people's backs, But do enjoy it for the fact that it was pure. Just when this is the time when we all thought it was real at this time. Okay, so you watch this, you see the blonde hair, blue eyed Owen Hart, getting beat down, but then getting his rise off of it. So it's a lot of fun to watch. I highly encourage people watching it, and it's a really interesting time and a somewhat forgotten time, but hopefully we can rehash a bit.
And for yourself, your various hats that you wear, what's coming down the pipeline for yourself?
You know what? I was going to say the music's getting back to things with playing live, but with everything going wonky in the U.S. here again, we're not sure. But definitely live again with Hemi, my metal band that I'm in. So we're back to that. So HemiMusic.com, and all the links are there. But definitely check that out. Wrestling-wise, though, T&I podcast, which was I invested a lot of time and love and money and whatever into. We did the Thursday post show, and I no longer do that. I have a bit of an issue with the current product. I don't think it's not the T&I I grew up on. I mean, I'm a day one guy, so for me to step away from the podcast, I'm still watching it, but it more so was like, I can't believe that this is what they're doing now, and they're losing their identity in certain things. I just said, I can't put this over with a straight face right now until it goes back to what I felt was what made them who they are. And so it's a bit of a weird time for me there. Plus some dealings with management and stuff just really rubbed me the wrong way. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to step away from this now. Let the rest of the team handle the Thursday show. But I'm still doing the Tuesday night post show. Oh, I'm sorry, Tuesday night the throwback show.
Yes.
We're doing the Asylum shows from 2002 to 2004. And we're on episode 83 of 111. This is before they leave Nashville and go to Florida, to the Impact Zone. So doing those, it's a blast. That's what made me love the company, so it's been a blast to rewatch those again. So doing that on Tuesdays, and I'll pop in. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/WeTalkImpact bonus show, so I'll pop in on the bonus stuff. But as far as the Thursday primary post show, I'm no longer on that. However, I am doing the Backstage Voice podcast still, which I mentioned at the top of the show, so it's a little behind-the-scenes take on independent wrestling. But the big thing is AAW Pro, full calendar. I mean, calendar's been back. We've been right back to where we wanted to be, so shows are on. The big one coming up, Destination Chicago, is on September 2nd. It is basically during that all-out weekend, which is all festivities of AEW going on in Chicago, so they're here all week. And we're right there on Thursday kicking off the weekend party. So put it this way, if not 65 to 70% of the AEW roster has come through AEW's doors. So you never know who's going to show up. You don't know who's good in town, who wants to make a pop-in. But we are, for a long time, it was us and PWG who were kind of setting the rules on indie wrestling and who's the next star call-ups, So for us to kind of be back in that and right in the thick of things with everything opening back up, it's been a blast. So Destination Chicago, one of the premier events. It's the first one back in the city itself. While other shows have been in the suburbs, this is right at the Logan Square Auditorium, a historic venue. So we are going to have a really good time on the circuit, along with everything else coming up. The Jim Lynam Memorial Tournament, which is a 16-man tournament. It's in October, 2 days long. Got that coming up. There's the full calendar on AAWPro.com.
Looking forward to that, and looking forward to your further potential on-air appearances as well with AAW.
I might be, now there's a rumor, I might be doing the in-ring open at the Logan Square Auditorium.
Oh, wow.
I might be. I was told last night, because I asked Danny Daniels, who's the owner of AAW. He used to be in ECW, if anybody's familiar with. Danny Daniels was the heel referee turned wrestler who screwed Jerry Lynn and, getting involved in all that, all the feuding there. So Danny owns AAW, but I was like, you gonna do an in-ring open? Just kind of welcome everybody back? And he's like, maybe I'll have you do it. I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, all right, well, just let me know. So we'll see.
Well, I for one, am looking forward to that, and looking forward to everything that you have coming on in the future as well. You mentioned the backstage boys. I mispronounced that earlier. We talked about We Talk Impact. We talked about AEW Pro. But where can people find you as well?
Trent Zuberi on Twitter is my Twitter handle. Just find me there. And I retweet all the stuff from my other projects. So if you look in my feed, you'll see all the other stuff I'm involved in. So check that out. But yeah, Trent Zuberi on Twitter, TrentZuberi is my Twitter handle. It's probably the best way. It's my only public facing forum aside from the project, which are all public. But my own personal public facing forum is probably just Twitter.
Tremendous. Well, Trent, thank you very much for your time today, man. I'm gonna have to have you on again.
Anytime. And you know what? If you want to jump on, I don't have too much power on the Thursday show anymore, but you don't want to jump on an old throwback episode of TNA, definitely feel free on a Tuesday night. Let me know.
There we go. Might have to take you up on that.
Got it, man.
Thanks, brother.
You got it. Anytime. It's a pleasure.
As we move to the finish of tonight's program, I just really want to thank once again Trent Zuberi for taking a ton of time to talk with me in regards to Gama Singh and Karachi Vice. Trent has a wealth of knowledge both in front of and behind the camera of the wrestling business. So any chance I have to talk to him is really a treat, and I hope that everybody was able to kind of get a glimpse of the mind that the man holds, if you will. Once again, want to also thank everybody for checking out the program. We've gotten a ton of 5-star reviews on Good Pods. Unfortunately, no names or anything was left, so I can't give anybody specifically a shout out. Once again, for anybody who doesn't know, if you leave a 5-star rating and a review, then I will make sure that I shout that out on the next available program. But one person I did want to actually want to shout out a couple of people, but one for sure is Craig Baird. He is the host of Canadian History X. He does a multitude of Canadian-centric podcasts focusing on history. He has From John to Justin, that was focusing on the Canadian prime ministers and their opposition parties. He also does World War I podcast, as well as one regarding the Canadian Pacific Railway. So, Craig just sent such a nice note, and I wanted to give him a shout out on the air. He said, and he was I should preface this, he was doing a cross Alberta drive to go through all of the historical sites in the province, which I thought was super neat. But anyways, he said on Twitter, I've been catching up on a lot of podcasts while I drive my tour. Even if wrestling is not your thing, this podcast is fantastic. This is in regards to our Abdul the Butcher episode. Well researched, a great host, archival audio, great guests, interesting topics, and so much more. Give it a listen. It releases monthly. So, Craig, I just wanted to thank you very much for that. You didn't have to say that, and it was super nice. And Craig is such a great guy. A great follow on Twitter as well. I would highly suggest everybody go give him a follow at CraigBaird. And I have that memorized from his various podcasts that I get a kick out of listening to. So once again, Craig, thank you very much for that one. There also was somebody else I wanted to give a shout out to, because when I post these episodes up, I do my usual social media blitz, which also includes Reddit. Although I don't know that Reddit really does anything for me, but I just always feel like it's just another place to maybe get some exposure and put it out there. And I hadn't really ever gotten any kind of traction or reaction or anything like that until this past month, again with the Abdul the Butcher episode. So I just wanted to shout out his screen name, or her screen name, don't even know if it's a man or a woman or whatever. Dundee's Working Punch said some really nice things about the program last month in regards to the Abdul the Butcher program. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Reddit user Dundee's Working Punch. That was pretty sweet. So it makes doing this all worthwhile, and it makes that little bit of interaction makes it fun. So thank you everybody for the kind words. Like I said, if you go to your way to leave a 5-star rating and review, whether it's on iTunes or Podchaser or Good Pods, or if there's any other rating and review platform that I'm missing out, If you leave it there, I will be sure to read it on the next available episode. Also, if you want to leave a review on our Facebook group in regards to the episode as well, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll make sure that I get that out on the next available episode. So there's a couple of things that I teased at the top of the program that I want to get into before we kind of close up tonight. One is t-shirts. They will be ready for October. I've been talking about this for a few months. Unfortunately, I've been delayed with work, with home life, with construction bills, my house. It's been a struggle. So I'm going to have them ready for October. Now, if you're new to this program, and because I don't really mention it every month, what I'm going to be doing is it's going to be a limited run, 50 shirts of the classic Grappling with Canada logo with the Canadian Maple Leaf flag. I'm only doing 50. Once they're sold out, they're sold out. The proceeds of these t-shirts are being donated to the Children's Hospital here in Winnipeg. If anybody knows the story of my youngest daughter from the Six-Sided Podcast program, or I may have mentioned it in one of the earlier programs of this podcast. I don't really remember, but essentially our youngest daughter spent the first few months of her life in NICU, and the staff there was incredible. And ever since, I've always wanted to do something above and beyond for the hospital. So this is one thing that I thought of that I thought would be a good idea. So once again, look for these in October. And I want to stress this, if you specifically want a size, or you want to make sure that you are in on the ground floor, shoot me an email, sixsidepod@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Twitter. On twitter.com, it would be @6_podcast, or you can shoot me a message on the Facebook group Grappling with Canada. Just let me know if you want a certain size. A few of you already have. I still have those emails. They haven't gone away. So if you thought I've lost them over the last few months, I haven't. I still have them. So if you are looking for a specific size, if you want to make sure that I order enough of a specific size that you're guaranteed to get one, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. And like I said, when they are released, there's only going to be 50. That's it. And the proceeds are going to the Children's Hospital here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. So I think like that's a pretty good cause, at least. So I'm looking forward to that. In regards to the direction of this program, it is staying the way it is. I've had a lot of emails lately in regards to this program joining a network or joining some kind of an agency or anything like that. I'm going to unequivocally say that this show will not be doing any of that. Point blank, period. Full disclosure, before I ever released episode 1 of this show, I had pitched it to one specific podcast network that is kind of in the same vein as what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to say what it is because it's not really relevant. They never got back to me, and to be honest, I'm kind of glad about that, because this program has been allowed to grow and mature and find its footing without any kind of outside influence, which I've been very appreciative of. A lot of that comes from you guys, the listeners. Literally, we have thousands upon thousands of you each month that listen to this program, and I couldn't be more happy. I don't sit there and chart numbers and look at metrics and drag here, click this, spreadsheet bullshit. I'm not doing that. In fact, the last time I looked at any kind of numbers for any episode was maybe the Billy to Rivers episode. And how long ago was that now? So, anyways, this program will not be doing anything like that. I'm also not going to be paywalling any of this ever that's not the point of this program. The point of the program is exploring Canadian wrestling history, exploring these great stories like the one I just told tonight about Great Gama Singh. You can't do that if it's stuck behind a paywall. And I get the argument behind it, and I understand that there's, some podcasts who will sit there and read Wikipedia and put it behind a paywall because it's whatever. Maybe it's their job for life or whatever. Or, they have a network of shows without ads on it where they sit there and read The Observer and go page by page for whatever. I get it. Shows got to make money to a point. I have a full-time job. I don't do this to make money. I do this because it's something I'm passionate about. And it's because I really care about getting these stories out there. And from what I gather from everybody that reaches out to me, and from the amount of listens that we get, like I said, I haven't looked at it in a few months, but what if I'm sure it's what it was, there are a lot of people who feel the same. So once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, everybody who's checked out this program, whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Good Pods, which I highly recommend, or Podchaser, whatever. If you have the option to leave us a 5-star review and rating, please do. The other thing I will ask, and I usually do, is if you're on your phone right now, or you're very close to your social media right now, which you probably are because, Jesus, everybody's within 5 feet of their phone. Otherwise, you get like that, oh, where's my phone? I can't find it. It's over here. It would help me immensely if you would recommend us to your friends and family. Tell them you listen to the Taxman, you enjoyed the interview with Trent Zuberi, which I know you did because I enjoyed it immensely. And let's keep this thing going. Without you guys promoting the program, it wouldn't have been doing as good as it is. So that's on you guys. And every listener that I have, I'm so thankful for. And you guys are making it worth it. So kudos to you. Let's keep this thing rolling. Let's keep Canadian history out there. If you need to or if you would like to, not even need to, if you'd like to contact me for any reason, I'm super easy to find on your Facebook groups page, Grappling With Canada. You can shoot me a message at any time. I'm super accessible. Like I said, you can always shoot me a DM on Twitter if that's your thing, at 6_podcast. You can email me, 6sidepod@gmail.com. You could snail mail me, but yeah, we're just going to leave the one on the back burner. Oh, and I will mention, just in terms of the Facebook group, I'm going to be doing a fun little giveaway in a couple of weeks, so keep it locked there. It's going to be it's nothing big, but just something fun for members on the Facebook